They say you never really know someone until they stand behind you in the dark, or until they stand behind you with a map worth millions and a reason to leave you behind. But let me start before all that, before the cave, before the silence, before the rocks. My name is Natalie Vega, and for 15 years, I lived what many would call a stable marriage. No screaming, no cheating, no late-night scandals, just routine. Predictable, comfortable, maybe even boring, but safe. I'm a geologist, which means I don't just read the earth, I listen to it. I spend days in the field, scraping at walls of stone, pulling secrets from the bones of the planet. To me, every rock has a memory. Every fault line is a sentence waiting to be translated. I don't need roses or diamonds. Give me granite, and I'll give you joy. And then there's Charles, my husband, or as I saw him then, my person. He didn't care for rocks or dust or muddy boots. He cared for optics, for angles, for shaking hands with the right people and smiling in rooms where power lingered like cologne. Charles was a pitchman, a storyteller. He could sell fire to the sun and charm to the devil. When we met, I was elbow deep in a dig site, covered in sweat and sandstone. He wore a crisp shirt, shiny shoes, and that grin, the kind you mistake for sincerity until it's too late. And yet, I fell for him, hard. We built a life out of contrast, science and sales, silence and spotlight, boots and briefcases. Opposites attract, people say. But no one ever tells you that opposites can also erase each other. Still, I tried. God, I tried. I learned how to listen when he talked about branding and packaging. I sat in on pitch meetings, nodded through investor dinners, played the smiling wife while secretly itching to be back in the field. In return, he'd sometimes ask about my research. Not the deep parts, not the thrilling ones, just the headlines. The numbers, the valuation, the press angle. And I told myself that was enough, because we laughed sometimes, and traveled, and held hands at airports, and kissed on New Year's. We're partners, I'd say with pride. But in the back of my mind, there was always a whisper. Are you really? Or are you just the quiet one funding someone else's spotlight? It wasn't always bad. That's what makes betrayal so sharp. It slices where it once felt warm. For a long time, I thought we were on the same team. Turns out we were just playing different games. And I didn't know until it was almost too late. It began with a shimmer, just a glint in the rock-black, glassy, barely visible, unless you knew exactly where to look. But I knew. The Sierra Nevada range had always called to me. I'd surveyed the area 5 years ago, marked the coordinates in a journal no one else ever read. Back then, the vein was too deep, the tech too limited. But something about that glint, it stayed with me. It haunted me like a secret begging to be found. I spent months requesting updated equipment, filing grants, chasing budget approvals. And then finally, I got permission. With a newer spectrometer and satellite overlays, I returned to the ridge alone. And there it was, a seam of tantalum and niobium, rare earth metals hidden for centuries beneath untouched earth. It wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was a global economic shift. What I held in my hands was worth tens of millions, and to a lesser soul, it was worth betrayal. I should have waited to share the news. I should have called my institute. But instead, I went home that night flushed with pride and awe and told Charles. His reaction? Subtle. Too subtle. He smiled, nodded, poured me a glass of wine. He even said, we should check it out together, just the two of us, like old times. And I, fool that I was, clung to that tiny flicker of affection like a woman starving for warmth. That map, that damn map, it should have stayed in my field book. Instead, I handed it to him with shaking hands, thinking I was offering a gift. I didn't know I was delivering my own death sentence. Just the two of us, that's what he said. No entourage, no research team, no paperwork noise or third-party witnesses. Like old times. Charles said again, his voice a warm hum over the rim of his wine glass. He smiled that smile, not too wide, not too eager, just enough to stir old memories. Road trips in his pickup, stargazing after conferences, falling asleep in tents with maps on our chests, and I wanted it. God, I wanted it to be real. After all, hadn't I just brought home the biggest discovery of my life? Didn't I deserve to celebrate it with the man I'd shared everything with? So when he said, "I'll carry the heavy gear," and "let's leave before sunrise, beat the heat," and "I already packed snacks, I know you forget when you're excited," it felt sweet, thoughtful, caring. But that's the thing about poison. It often comes in the flavor you crave most. There were signs, of course, small ones, quiet ones. He asked no questions about the minerals, none about the readings. He didn't marvel at the value, didn't ask how I planned to publish. He didn't seem proud. He seemed prepared. But I didn't see it. I was too busy trying to believe in the version of him I fell in love with, instead of the version standing in front of me. And by the time I noticed the look in his eyes, we were already halfway up the mountain. The forest was golden. Amber leaves drifted lazily from tall, ancient trees, landing like soft whispers on the damp trail. The morning light pierced through the canopy in streaks, painting everything in hues of fire and honey. It was the kind of day people write poetry about. Crisp air, stillness, a kind of beauty so pure it almost makes you forget the world can be cruel. Almost. I should have been thrilled. I was heading toward the greatest geological find of my career. But instead of excitement, I felt cold. Not on my skin, but deep in my chest, like a wind had passed through my bones. Charles walked a few paces behind me. His boots crunched steadily on the gravel path. He didn't speak much, neither did I. There was something about the silence that didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt calculated. He carried 2 packs, mine light and compact, his bulkier than necessary. I offered to switch once. He declined. "Let me," he said, brushing it off. "You always do the thinking." Let me do the lifting. It sounded sweet. It sounded like him. But for some reason, it didn't feel right. Every so often, I glanced back. He smiled when I did, but it never reached his eyes. It was polite, empty. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe it was just the mountain air. But for the first time in years, I realized I didn't know what Charles was thinking, and that scared me more than the climb ahead. The moment we stepped inside, the world changed. The air grew heavier, cooler, thicker. It wrapped around my skin like a damp cloth, and every breath felt like pulling earth through my lungs. We clicked on our headlamps. Beams of light cut through the darkness, sharp, narrow, alive. The cave walls sparkled in response, fragments of crystal winking back at us from the void. Every footstep echoed like a question. "Are you sure?" I was. This was my world. Stone silence, discovery, the smell of wet minerals. The stillness only found deep beneath the surface of a living mountain. I dreamed of this moment for years, returning to this exact place with the right tools ready to prove what I always suspected. And then I saw it, a black shimmer along the eastern wall, thin as thread, smooth as oil, tantalum. It was real. My heart skipped, my hands trembled. I knelt slowly, pulling out my tools with reverence as if I were touching something sacred. Behind me, Charles said nothing. Just the crunch of his boots as he stepped back, then further back. But I didn't turn around. I was lost in the moment, labeling samples, marking coordinates, holding in my hands the future of our field, and in some cruel twist, the key to my own undoing. In that cave, I had never felt more alive. And yet, in less than 10 minutes, I would be closer to death than I had ever known. "Nat?" His voice was soft, almost tender. It echoed strangely in the cave, bouncing off the rock like a memory I didn't want to hold. "Come here, I want to show you something." I looked up from the samples in my hand, turned around slowly. Charles stood a few feet away, headlamp flickering slightly over the jagged walls behind him. His face, it wore a smile, but not the kind that made you feel safe. No, it was the kind of smile you see on people who know you're too late. I hesitated. "Charles, what is it?" He didn't answer. He just reached out, pulled me in, close arms tight around my waist like a lover. "I love you," he whispered into my ear. And just like that, something broke inside me. I couldn't explain it, but every cell in my body screamed, "This isn't right." My breath caught, my skin went cold. "Charles?" I asked again, voice tight with unease. He pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, and that's when I saw it. Not love, not remorse, resolve. "I'm sorry," he said. Then came the push. Hard, fast, unforgiving. My back slammed against the stone, stars burst behind my eyes. Before I could scream, he turned and ran toward the entrance. "Charles!" I scrambled to my feet, lungs burning, rock dust in my mouth. I chased after him, stumbling, slipping. Then, the first crack. Then another. Then the roar. The sound of stone collapsing, heavy, brutal, final. I reached the mouth of the cave just as it vanished behind a wall of falling granite. I threw myself at the rock, fists pounding, voice raw and breaking. "Charles, what are you doing? Open this damn cave!" And then, through the dust and silence, his voice, muffled, calm. "You always loved your rocks more than me, Natalie. Now you can stay with them, forever." And then nothing. Only the echo of betrayal and the terrifying sound of being alone. I don't know how long I screamed. Maybe a minute, maybe a lifetime. My fists pounded against the stone until skin split, blood warming my knuckles as it dripped onto the cold granite. I yelled until my voice gave out, until every sound I made came back to me, warped and hollow. Not even an echo, just the shape of my own panic thrown back at me by the cave walls. "Charles!" My voice cracked into something unrecognizable. I wasn't calling him anymore. I was calling the world, anyone, but the world didn't answer. Only the dripping of water. Only the pulse in my ears. Only the realization I was alone. I sank to my knees, my palms raw, my lungs on fire. For a moment, I wasn't a scientist. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't Natalie Vega. I was just a body in the dark, an abandoned thing with no name and no way out. I thought of the samples in my pack, of the journal that still had my initials, and it hit me. He hadn't just buried me. He was erasing me. I curled against the rock wall, cold seeping into my bones. Time warped. There were no hours, only moments stretched into eternity. I whispered to myself to stay calm. But how do you stay calm when someone you love writes your obituary with a rock slide? I closed my eyes. Darkness stayed. I pressed my forehead to the cold stone, trying to slow my breath. But my mind didn't want calm. It wanted chaos. Memories rushed in like floodwater, violent, sudden, and impossible to hold back. I remembered our first apartment. Charles cooking pasta with too much garlic, me studying rock formations on the couch, nodding through his marketing rants. We were broke, but we were, together. I remembered how proud he looked the day I got my research grant. He brought home a cheap bottle of champagne and kissed me like I'd just won a Nobel. I remembered the early years road trips, tent nights, conference booths with broken displays, and big dreams. And I remembered when it all started to change. When he stopped asking questions, when he started checking the clock during my presentations, when he forgot to show up at my symposium 3 years in a row, when he stopped calling me brilliant and started calling me intense, when he praised my strength in public but punished my ambition in private. I thought we were evolving, but maybe we were just unraveling. I remembered late-night fights, me crying in the kitchen while he slept soundly in the next room. I remembered the way he flinched when I mentioned my female colleagues by name. I remembered that smile, that perfect performative smile. And I remembered every time I looked the other way. Because that's what we do, isn't it? We excuse, we rationalize, we trade silence for survival until the silence becomes a tomb. I curled tighter against the cave wall, furious at him. But more furious at myself for missing it, for excusing it, for loving someone who deep down saw me as a threat, not a partner. And now he'd buried me under the mountain I loved, and he thought no one would ever find me. But he was wrong, because I was still here, and I was remembering everything. I was slipping. Not physically, though. My body ached like I'd been crushed from the inside, but mentally, emotionally, reality began to unravel thread by thread. The cold had settled into my bones. The silence pressed against my skull like a scream too quiet to be heard. Every second alone stretched like an hour. And then I saw it. Not light at first, just a flicker, a movement in the dark that didn't belong to me. I froze. My hand went instinctively to the flashlight on my belt, half praying it would work, half preparing to swing it like a weapon. And then he stepped into view. A tall figure, maybe 6 feet, broad shoulders. Beard thick with dust. Lantern glowing faintly in his left hand. A hunting knife strapped to his hip. He looked like something pulled out of a ghost story. Not malicious, not monstrous, but misplaced. Like he had wandered out of another time and stumbled into my nightmare. I backed into the cave wall, heart hammering. Who are you? My voice cracked from thirst and screaming. He didn't flinch, just raised his free hand, palm open. Easy, he said, his tone low, careful. I'm not here to hurt you. He stepped closer, slowly. Calm, measured. My name's Elias. That name felt unreal, like saying it aloud might shatter the tension hanging between us. He crouched by a rock near the collapsed entrance, studied it like someone who had done this before. There's no airflow here, he muttered to himself, then looked at me again. He blocked your only breathable tunnel. I stared at him, still clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. You saw, he nodded once, enough to know your husband's not coming back. A tear I didn't know I still had slipped down my cheek. Why would you help me? Elias met my eyes, and in them I didn't see pity. I saw recognition, pain, loss, survival. Because I've been there, he said, and no one should come out of the dark alone. We moved like shadows, slow, deliberate, clinging to the walls, like they could collapse at any second. Elias led the way. I followed one breath at a time. The tunnel narrowed quickly, forcing us to move single file. The floor was slick with moisture. The air had changed, no longer stagnant, but charged, like something deeper waited ahead. Every sound echoed. My heartbeat, our boots, the occasional drip of mineral-rich water from above. He paused often, listening, feeling, not just with ears, but with instinct. This wasn't just a cave to Elias, it was a map burned into his muscles. A place he didn't just survive, he understood. He'd lived in this darkness for 3 years. I could barely last 1 hour. He guided us through a narrow pass where the ceiling dipped so low I had to crouch, where the ground tilted just slightly toward one side, just enough that a misstep could send you tumbling into a pit you'd never crawl out of. There's a pocket of air ahead, he whispered, pointing at a break in the stone. A rest stop, a rest stop. Inside a mountain that wanted to kill me. We entered the small chamber, barely big enough for 2 people to sit. Elias lit a second lantern and handed me a protein bar. Eat, hydrate, stay warm. I stared at the light flickering on the stone walls. It made the crystals shimmer like glass. Beautiful. Deceptive. How did you survive here? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, not with pity, but with memory. I didn't want to, he said quietly. Not at first. But then, surviving became the only thing I could do. I didn't reply, because I understood. We were strangers. But in that moment, in that cave, we were also the same. Not quite dead, not quite alive, just trying to get out. We sat in the silence, not the cruel kind from earlier, but something softer, more human, more shared. The fire flickered between us. Its glow painted Elias's face in warm gold and deep shadows. He didn't look at me when he spoke. His eyes stayed on the flame, as if it was safer to tell the truth to fire than to another person. Her name was Leah, he said quietly, my wife. I didn't speak, didn't move. And our daughter, Sophie, she was 9. She loved horses, hated broccoli, wanted to be a vet. He smiled briefly. Then the smile broke. We were hiking, Cascade Range. I knew the trail like the back of my hand. We'd done it a dozen times, but that day, he swallowed hard. There had been heavy rain the night before. I knew the ground would be loose. I knew it. But I thought, we'll be fine. We always are. He paused. The silence this time was heavier. The rock slide came out of nowhere. I was maybe 20 feet ahead. Leah was helping Sophie with her pack. His voice cracked just once. I heard a sound like thunder and turned around just in time to see the whole side of the ridge give way, like the earth just gave up. He looked down at his hands. I dug with my bare fingers for hours. I found Sophie's boot first, then her necklace, then nothing. My throat tightened. Tears stung the corners of my eyes. I couldn't bring myself to go home, he said. I left. I kept walking until there weren't people anymore, until there was no noise. And then I found this place, and it was quiet enough to let me scream. I didn't speak. Because what do you say to a man who buried his world with his own hands? Instead, I reached across the space between us, not to touch him, just to let him know he wasn't alone in the dark anymore. We hit a wall. Not literally, though. The rock face in front of us might as well have been a grave. The tunnel narrowed into a slit, barely wide enough for a human torso. Elias squatted down and studied it. There's another path past this crack, leads to the aquifer. It's the only way out from here. He looked up at me. But it's tight and freezing. I nodded. I can do it. I couldn't. The moment I entered the passage, the cold slapped me like a punishment. Water seeped through my jacket straight to my bones. My breath caught. My limbs locked up. It wasn't just narrow, it was suffocating, like crawling through a throat that didn't want you there. About halfway through, I lost it. My body gave out, my hand slipped, my face smashed into rock. Water rushed over my head. The world went dark inside and out. Somewhere in the blur, I felt fingers hook under my arms. He was dragging me, not gently, urgently, desperately. I coughed, water pouring from my mouth. "Breathe," Elias shouted, slapping my cheeks. "Natalie, damn it, stay with me." I gasped. Air burned like fire, but I was alive. He wrapped me in his arms, not like a hero, but like a man who knew what it meant to almost lose someone again. We sat in the mud, shaking, soaked hearts pounding out of sync. Finally, I looked at him. "Why didn't you let me go?" He didn't blink, didn't hesitate, because this time I could save someone. And for the first time, I believed him. At first, I thought it was just a dream, a soft breeze on my skin, the smell of pine, and then warmth, real, golden, blinding warmth. I opened my eyes. Above me, the sky, blue, endless, and impossibly bright after so long in darkness. Elias climbed out behind me, helping me the last few feet. We both collapsed onto the rocky ridge, our bodies shaking, not from cold this time, but from something else entirely. Relief, shock, a strange kind of joy that tasted like salt and dirt and sun. I tilted my head back, let the sun pour onto my face. Tears leaked from the corners of my eyes, but this time I didn't wipe them away, because they weren't for pain, they were for survival. For 3 days, we had crawled through tunnels carved by water and time. We had faced death not once, but over and over again. Now we were back, and everything looked different. The trees, the wind, the air, even me. I had entered that cave as a wife. I emerged as a survivor. And the man beside me, he wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was proof that even in the deepest dark, a light can find you if you don't give up on being found. The first thing I saw when we reached the edge of town was the neon sign, Miller's Diner All-Day Breakfast. My legs were shaking, my face still crusted with dust, but I pushed open the door like I belonged there. It was quiet. A few heads turned, then quickly looked away as if unsure I was real. Maybe I wasn't. Until I heard it. It is with unimaginable sorrow that I share the tragic news of my wife's death. My head snapped toward the sound. A flat-screen TV on the wall. CNN. And there he was, Charles, standing on a podium in a crisp suit, voice steady, eyes perfectly wet. A master performance. Natalie was my rock. Her passion for science, her commitment to the field, it cost her life in the Sierra Nevada. But I promise you her discovery will not be forgotten. Applause. Tears in the audience. Some even held candles. My mouth went dry. The room spun. He had declared me dead. He had turned my disappearance into a stage, my pain into a speech. And worse, he had claimed my life's work as his own. I took a step toward the counter, my hand trembling, pointing at the TV. "That man," I said, voice hoarse, "he's lying." Nobody moved, so I spoke louder. "I'm not dead." A fork clattered to the ground, and in that moment, every eye turned toward me, not in fear, but in disbelief. Like I had just crawled out of my own grave and walked into town with nothing but the truth. The police station smelled like old paper and stale coffee. A young officer at the front desk didn't even look up at first. I walked straight up to him, my clothes still dirty, my hands scraped raw, my voice steady. "My name is Natalie Vega," I said, "and I'd like to report an attempted murder." The entire room froze. The officer's pen stopped mid-air. He blinked at me slowly, like he wasn't sure what he'd heard. "I'm sorry? Could you repeat that?" I leaned in closer. "My husband, Charles Vega, led me into a cave 3 days ago and left me there to die. He collapsed the entrance. He thought I'd never come out." A silence fell over the station so heavy, it felt like the whole building was holding its breath. Another officer stepped in, then another, then the sheriff himself. They didn't speak, they just stared. Until I pulled out the one thing that silenced all doubt, the field notebook, covered in dirt and blood, but still legible, my handwriting. My coordinates, my name, and one more thing. "There's a witness," I said. "His name is Elias Monroe. He saved my life." That was when things changed. Phones started ringing, files were pulled, a detective nodded to the sheriff. Within minutes, they had a team ready, not just to listen, but to act. Because in a town full of stories, the truth finally had a voice. The press conference was staged like a Hollywood production. White tents, folded chairs, banners that read, "The Future of Earth, a Revolution in Resource Science." And there he was. Charles Vega, smiling, confident, standing on a portable stage in the middle of the Sierra Nevada wilderness, selling my discovery like it was always his. Thanks to my late wife's work, he said, we have uncovered a vein of tantalum that will redefine the electronics industry. Applause, flashbulbs, investors and sunglasses nodding like this was the next gold rush. He had no idea. From behind the last row of chairs, I stepped forward. Covered in dust, face cut, bruised but unbroken. The audience went quiet, one gasp, then another. Charles faltered mid-sentence. His eyes scanned the crowd, and locked on mine. He blinked, shook his head. This can't be real. But I kept walking. Oh, it's real, I said, loud, clear, unshaken. Cameras turned, reporters turned, investors turned, and I stopped in front of the stage. You tried to bury me, Charles, I said. But here I am alive, breathing, and ready to finish the story you tried to erase. His hand shook, because in front of every person he had lied to, every dollar he tried to steal, I came back. Not as a ghost, not as a wife, but as the storm he never saw coming. He was still talking, still selling a lie with polished teeth and a predator's smile. And now, with the support of our investors, we can begin excavation by Q4. The words died in his throat. Because from behind the tents, from the shadows of the forest, I stepped out. One step, then another, boots caked in dirt, hair tangled, face streaked with cuts, but my eyes cold, clear, and locked on him. Hello, Charles. His face drained of color. It was as if he saw a ghost, his ghost, the one he tried to bury under 200 feet of stone. Natalie, he whispered. I didn't smile, didn't blink, just stood there. Disappointed I didn't die? Silence spread like wildfire. The crowd watched in frozen disbelief. The investors, the media, even the forest held its breath. He stepped back, then another step. I kept walking forward. You left me in that cave. You thought the world would forget me and crown you king. But here I am, Charles, the woman you buried, is the one who came back to ruin you. He stammered. This is crazy. Someone call... I already did, I cut in. The police are on their way, and so is your future in handcuffs. His knees buckled slightly. The great Charles Vega, brilliant, beloved, untouchable, now pale, cornered, and shaking like a child. Because the ghost he created was no longer a memory. She was real, and she was standing in the light. The sirens sliced through the silence. 1, 2, 3 patrol cars pulled into the clearing, tires crunching gravel. The audience turned. So did the cameras. Charles didn't move. Mr. Vega, the sheriff called out, stepping from the car. You're under arrest for attempted murder and fraud. The world stood still. 2 officers flanked the stage. One climbed up. Charles raised his hands slowly, trembling. His voice cracked. This is a mistake. Click. The sound of the handcuffs echoed louder than the applause that followed. Flashes burst like fireworks. Journalists screamed questions. Investors backed away. And I stood there watching it all. I didn't need to say much, but I did walk up to the cameras. Looked directly into the lens. He tried to bury me, I said, but he forgot one thing. I paused. Let every lens drink it in. Truth cuts through rock. The final image, Charles being led away in cuffs, head down, legacy ruined, and me standing in the same boots I almost died in, alive, defiant, and finally seen. Weeks later, the mountains looked different, not because they'd changed, but because she had. Natalie Vega stood in front of a carved metal sign surrounded by scientists, press, and engineers. Vega Ridge, Geological Discovery Site 2025. A name once whispered in betrayal was now etched into earth. The tantalum vein once claimed by Charles was now legally hers. Her data, her name, her truth. She didn't cry. She didn't boast. She simply placed her hand on the stone wall and let silence speak. Reporters asked how she felt. "I didn't survive to feel victorious," Natalie said. "I survived to be heard and to keep discovering. Science isn't just about minerals. It's about truth, and truth demands courage." Behind her, workers had begun setting up lab modules. Young geologists looked at her like she was a myth come true. And maybe she was, because she'd been buried but came back to make the earth remember her name. Elias didn't leave after the cameras stopped flashing. He stayed, not as a hero, not as a savior, just Elias, a man who once lost everything and still chose to help a stranger in the dark. They didn't talk about forever. There were no grand declarations, no sweeping music. But when Natalie walked to the edge of the ridge that now bore her name, he was there, a few steps behind, as always, letting her lead. "You still don't talk much," she teased one day. He smiled. "I figured you've had enough of men who talk too much." They both laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from surviving something no one else will ever understand. And in that quiet between coffee and rock samples, between silence and glances, a different kind of love was born. Not one of fireworks, but of solid ground. She didn't need saving. He never tried. He just stayed. And sometimes that's more than enough. The night was still. Above her, the stars blinked quiet witnesses to a war only she had fought. Natalie stood on the balcony of her small cabin overlooking Vega Ridge. The wind was gentle, brushing her hair as if nature itself was finally exhaling. She took a deep breath, then whispered into the night, "I was buried once by the man I trusted most." Her voice didn't tremble, not anymore. "But from now on, I live for me. No one gets to bury me ever again." Behind her, the lights from the lab flickered, her team still working, the world still turning. But in that moment, with the stars above and the mountain below, Natalie Vega was whole, not broken, not surviving, but living. And somewhere in the shadows, Elias leaned quietly against the doorframe, listening, protecting, without needing to speak. Because some promises aren't made to anyone else. They're made to ourselves, and they're the ones that truly last. They tried to bury her, but forgot she was a seed. Natalie's story isn't just about betrayal. It's about rising back up when no one expects you to. It's a reminder that not everyone who says, "I love you," means "I want you to grow." Sometimes the person closest to you is the one holding the shovel. But no matter how deep they bury you, truth has a way of breaking through. In life, we all face dark tunnels. People will try to silence us, erase us, own what we built. But here's the truth. You don't need revenge. You don't need approval. You need courage, and you need to remember who you are. Natalie didn't survive to get even. She survived to take her life back on her own terms, and so can you. If this story hit something real in you, if you've ever felt buried, betrayed, or just forgotten, then don't scroll past. Hit that subscribe button. Because here, we tell stories like Natalie's stories of survival, grit, and rising from the dirt stronger than ever. Drop a comment and tell us what's something you came back from. We read everything. And if no one's told you lately, we're proud of you.